Welcome to the fifth and final day of 5 objects in 5 days, the short history of Chinese ceramics. So we've already covered the Han and the Tang dynasties, and then the Ming dynasty, followed yesterday by Emperor Kangxi. And today we will cover the 19th century. Now, the 19th century is sort of, we think, an unappreciated and unstudied, still fairly unstudied period of Chinese ceramics. But it comes in a sort of serious context of history. We have to view it.
The Qing dynasty is the last dynasty in the history of China. It runs from roughly 1644 and
Kangxi reign.
The Kangxi reign and ends in 1908. When I started in the business 30 years ago, the history of Chinese ceramics normally stopped circa 1800, and the 19th century was minor, neglected, wasn't important, played no role. And this immediately caught my attention. Why? Because when I saw Chinese ceramics, porcelain objects from the 19th century, I quite liked them. And silently, I've already collected all my career porcelain from the 19th century.
So the 19th century in China is one of great change, political, economical, and they had these Europeans pushing all on the borders of China and Russia, Japan, and China clinging on to its traditions. The trade with foreigners was limited to the port of Canton, and that way they tried to keep the Europeans out of mainland China. I do believe they were allowed to travel, but this trading went on in Canton. And it was mainly tea, which they were looking for in the 19th century. By 1800, I think there was 23 million pounds of tea imported into England on an annual basis, which is massive. 5% of the annual income of an average person in England would be spent on tea, which is also an incredible amount. So this tea business was a big money spinner for the trade companies, especially the English East Indian Company. And but there were also other luxury goods which were traded, such as porcelain, silver, fans, ivory carving, silks, obviously, and this all was the business which went on in Canton. But what could the English offer in return except for silver? Well, there wasn't much the Chinese really wanted, was there? I mean, apart from silver, maybe some clocks and that kind of thing. So the English and the other foreigners were searching for a way, an item which they could sort of trade in China.
And that was, of course, opium.
Yes.
And this is the famous story that the English would buy opium in India, bring it to China and trade it for goods with the Chinese. This got to such an extent and got totally out of hand.
Yes, there was a large addiction amongst the Chinese.
That the Chinese emperor wanted to prevent the English to trade opium in China. And this ended into the first Opium War, which was circa 1840. It is actually quite a shame, because if you look at the first 40 years of trade in China, it was an international business. The whole world would love to have objects from China.
In the 19th century.
In the 19th century, yes.
Before as well, but in particular. And it was traded from the Hongs of Canton, and anyway, so this opium was coming in. The Chinese lost the war, and the foreigners, the English, forced them to open several other treaty ports, so there was more access to the Chinese items which they could do. Well, anyway, it wasn't satisfying enough, because there was a second war, wasn't
there? Was a second war in 1860, the second Opium War, and this was quite intense because these foreign powers like England, Germany, America, they actually ransacked the Summer Palace just outside of Beijing and burned down this beautiful palace that was built in a European style.
Known as Yuan Ming Yuan.
Yeah, the famous Yuan Ming Yuan Palace, and this was to show the Chinese that they should shut up and do what these foreign powers wanted.
And actually looting and plundering was sort of the average outcome of war. The winner took what they wanted, and the English were pretty proud of it, and they found a Pekingese dog, which they presented to Queen Victoria, who was very much a contemporary of this time. And she called it Looty, which actually now we think, oh my God, that's really dreadful. But at the time it was like a sort of a thing of pride, I think, which they could do. So that dog sort of represents, and the painting is in the Royal Collection in the UK right now, it sort of represents the way people thought about China. It was just, they could do with it as they please, which is obviously not a very good thing.
During the Second Opium War in 1861, the then Emperor Xian Feng died, and he had a son of 4 years old. And he, of course, could not rule the country. So the empress took over, and here we come to the famous figure of the Empress Dowager Cixi, this woman who dominated politics, the country, for the second half of the 19th century in China. And she was a real character.
Yeah, she wasn't. I think there's a biography written about her, which I think many of you would have heard about. But she's a kind of contentious figure. Some say she dragged China kicking and screaming into modern times. Others say she was an evil, conniving woman who wouldn't let go of her power. But anyway, nonetheless, the production of porcelain just continued throughout this period. And I think we would like to look at some of the porcelain now.
I think it's a good moment to have a look. We want to start with a typical 19th century object in Chinese porcelain, with this vase. And the interesting bit of Chinese porcelain in the 19th century that they look back to earlier periods, and especially in this case to the Kangxi period. And it looks almost like a Kangxi vase, but I'm going to tell you why it is 19th century and not Kangxi. Look at the color. This is called famille noire, this overall black color, and we see that for the first time in the Kangxi period. The black color is enamel over glaze, and if you look at the way they decorated these flowers, that is typical of Kangxi style. It's very difficult to distinguish the difference. But when we look at the base, there is, very confusing, a Kangxi 6-character mark. It is an apocryphal mark. This is for honor and reference to the earlier Emperor Kangxi, which we spoke about yesterday.
It happens a lot. It happens a lot in earlier periods as well, when they're referencing earlier periods. But it was very confusing to the people of the time.
Exactly. When this arrived in Europe, but not only that, in this case in America, this comes from a private collection in America, the Anderson collection from Cincinnati. I am sure that they were convinced they bought a Kangxi vase. They didn't see the difference between 19th century or Kangxi. When I said I started in the business, I already in early stage started to study these 19th century pieces to distinguish the difference between Kangxi and 19th century. And I think it is now much more appreciated of its beauty, the quality as a 19th century vase.
And then that brings us to the second vase, also black, also in shape, could be Kangxi, but actually if you study it closely, you say, no, it's not possible. So one is the dragon on it is really a typical 19th century dragon, Daoguang, I think you said, yes. Dragon. So dragons changed in style during each period, and this is typical. So you see in this mirror black glaze, and then in gold painted afterwards the dragon. But if you look at the underside, so if you will help me out here, you see this rather striking turquoise colour. Now this would never have been done in the Kangxi period. So you see this, you also see the thick rim of the glaze running down, and then this colour. It has a label on the bottom as well, of Pierre Sacquet, who was a dealer in Paris. But this, would this have been mistaken, do you think, for a 19th century, for a Kangxi vase, or would this have been straight
that's
on?
Possible. I think what gives it away is the shape. It is slightly a bit bloated
yeah, a bit
from
squat.
the body. But secondly, there is a fascinating phenomenon. It's the weight. And the weight is just too heavy for a Kangxi vase. And the sense of weight we develop over, I did in 30 years, we have this sense that we have an expectance of the weight. And in this case, he's too heavy.
For a Kangxi.
For a Kangxi model.
But it is actually rather wonderful. It's like a really cool piece of porcelain. And so what about these? Because
Yes.
we looked at some blanc de Chine yesterday in the Kangxi, and this is made in Deihua in Fujian province again, so the so-called blanc de Chine. But you say that these are 19th century, so they were producing, in the 19th
Yes.
century.
To me, this is typical 19th century, because of the typical white color of these trees. And the glaze is very glassy, it's translucent, it is almost too clear. There is also a funny phenomenon, that's the sound of the porcelain, and the 19th century blanc de Chine has almost a metal sound. Again, this has a Taoist feature. Taoism is the connection to nature. You would put these trees indoors to get sort of philosophy, inspiration for calligraphy.
Also, the plum blossom tree is the first tree that blossoms after winter, so it's also a sign of hardiness and survival through hard times. So the plum blossom is a symbol seen often in Chinese art in general and in ceramics in particular. So you see it on here as well. So if you have the plum blossom, so you can see it on the vase here as well, plum blossoms. So,
are there any questions from the live chat?
Yes, we've got a couple. We've got one from Caroline, and she asked that they use the same production centers as in the 17th and 18th century.
Yes, that's a very good question.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Of course, this is still produced in the famous porcelain city of Yingzheng. But there is also production, especially in the later 19th century, in the city of Canton, so-called Canton porcelain.
yeah, and obviously the Deihua blanc de Chine,
Yes.
which is made, and no doubt there will be stoneware and other simple wares made throughout the country, but these were the main centers.
And for your information, Yingzheng is still today the porcelain city of China. The production goes on and on and on.
So even in the Chinese Republic, do you want to show it now? Your favorite bit of porcelain?
Yes.
From the early 20th century, when I first met him, he collected these early 20th century revolutionary porcelain. It's, how do I describe it? Interesting.
When I started in the business, we looked at it in such a different way to 19th century porcelain. It was considered to be ugly and no quality. I didn't agree. If we're going to look at 20th century porcelain, made during the communist period, again, people think that it's ghastly and it's horrible. I see the beauty of this kind of porcelain, and maybe in the future we will discuss the 20th century porcelain.
Yeah, because
the way we do.
It's Jingzheng.
It's all Jingzheng. Yeah. It comes from this one and only city, Yingzheng. Another question.
Yes, another question is, why was the 19th century less appreciated?
I think, shall I answer this
Yeah,
one? I think in general, 19th century is considered a sort of, for many years was considered a lesser period. It was kind of too modern. They say an antique starts 100 years after it was made. And I think it was just too close on. It wasn't in what was considered antique yet. And I think the porcelain just did the same thing. It was just not old enough to be considered to be taken seriously. And I think this is changing.
Yeah,
I think
the roots are in Europe. Also in Europe, they discarded the 19th century in furniture, silver as minor or a retro style. They were copying previous periods. Nowadays, thank God, we look at it differently. Yeah. Any more questions?
We've got one more, and that's the last one, and it is, what's the most typical 19th century porcelain object today.
The most
Should I get it?
typical- Yes.
That we have in the room. It's something from our private collection, which we,
Yeah.
you insisted putting out here. So I will bring it over.
I like it myself.
So maybe you could, if you
Oh,
put
yes.
that away, then I shall put this in so we can see it better. It's actually a little vase, and it screams, to us, it screams 19th century, just in the way it's made, in the way it's decorated. Maybe you can explain a little bit. I'll take the lid off. It's a lidded sort of, what is it? A ewer.
This is a ewer. Here's a dragon head. If you talk about 19th century Chinese ceramics, it is normally a retro style of an earlier period, but it goes over the top. And this is over the top Chinese porcelain. It is just too much.
Yeah.
But sometimes this is really nice to go over the top.
So it has a little Chinaman on the lid here, 2 dragons, and it's enamel on biscuit, and it's standing on a base, which is the logic of it standing on a base is a bit odd, but there you go.
Any more questions from the chat? No. Then I think
we come to the end of our series.
We come to the end of our series. We have to say goodbye. We did 5 live streams. For us, it was a fascinating and most discovering process. I would like to thank the production team that you can't see, but we are looking at.
Yep.
And I want to thank you, especially the viewers, the live viewers, and
for all the feedback we got as well, which was good for learning and improving what we do. So
keep watching us, and see you at the next live stream. Bye bye.
Bye bye.